now. Perfect. Okay, I will already admit some people, and yeah, we will then go ahead. I think 1 or 2 minutes past when like most of the people have joined.
Do what you feel like you're the.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. We will get started soon. So we're going to wait a little bit for others to join. And then, yeah, soon we will go ahead.
Hello, Carlo.
Hello there.
Hey.
What's
Let me
the
know
time?
if I enable your screen sharing, but I think it should be enabled already.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like I can share.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, then we will soon get started. I see a lot of people joining now at this moment, so that's nice. That's good. Okay, yeah, I will then get started. Let me know if the screen sharing is working.
I can see.
Yeah. Perfect.
Visible now?
It's working, yes. Perfect. All right. Yeah, like I suppose some people will be joining meanwhile. The good thing is we will be recording this as well in case some people join later or have to leave earlier. And the recording will be available on the TerraDo platform. Plus, we'll also do our best to send it to you afterwards. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining, everyone. And before we get started, I also want to notify you that today at the end of the session, we will have a Q&A. So if you want to get the most out of this webinar, please, I invite you all to participate, to submit questions through the chat, or questions can also be submitted per email. And yeah, to get started, first of all, thanks a lot to TerraDo for the support and for hosting this webinar. And also, especially thank you to our amazing speakers, Carlo and Mariana. Carlo, our principal sustainability consultant, and Mariana, our EU, ESG, and sustainability specialist, will present you the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the words to Carlo and Mariana.
Thank you, Anne, and welcome everyone. So yeah, let's take it away. I think the main reason that is bringing all of us together here today is that last year, especially navigating the evolutions of regulation in the EU and beyond as well, has been particularly complex. This was caused by initially, some political tensions, economic tensions that sort of put ESG a little bit in the background. Then Omnibus package came and sort of started to simplify, edit CSRD, CS-DDD, and other regulation, sort of in a cohesive package in the attempt of making things simpler, making EU more competitive by reducing the effort required for ESG reporting. But then this process was all really complex. There were delays, there were, discussions internally to the EU, and things really got sort of pushed until back in December. We weren't really sure on where this was all going to go, and so companies were confused. There was a feeling of sort of being left alone by the EU policymakers, who were like sort of leaving companies waiting and hanging with very little clarity and certainty. So now we really want to put a little bit of clarity on all that. This also came forth as a topic beyond the EU, and an example was the temporary pause of California's regulation SB 261 on climate-related risk disclosures. So we see it's a very broad, pretty complex perspective that we're facing right now. And yeah, so let's try and put a little bit of clarity on all that. To do that, we are going to bring this discussion up from three different perspectives, three different directions. One is, what are first and foremost the relevant regulations that EU companies should be aware? So not necessarily only EU regulations, but everything that could potentially apply to you. Then we are going to look at what is the current status of ESG regulations. And then we're going to try and do a sort of so what. So how can we make a plan with all these and like try and have a constructive 2026. At the end of this space, again, as Anne anticipated, there's going to be a live Q&A. So please save your questions and take notes on whatever doubt you might have, so you can have the chance of have it solved directly. Now, I'm going to leave the stage to Mariana, that is going to take it away for the first part.
Thank you, Carlo. So we're gonna talk about the key regulations for companies in the EU. So it seems a lot of acronyms right now, but they are kind of talking about corporate sustainability reporting, sustainability finance classification, supply chain and carbon-related obligations. We're gonna dig into 7 regulations, and we're gonna explore how the scope, timeline, and some reported obligations change. And it's not just a list that we want to dig into this webinar. We want to talk a little bit how this law overlaps with each other, and how they are not separate complying exercise. They are kind of increasingly talking to each other. So we're gonna dig into that on the second part. So let's start with the CSRD. CSRD is the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and is no longer a theoretical framework. Over the past year, we've seen a lot of back and forth within the EU institutions, debates, amendments in this law, uncertainty. And what is the natural question right now is, what is settled? So first, what is settled is the scope. The scope has been narrowed, so fewer companies are direct in the scope and have to report. So if your company has more than 1,000 employees and around 50 million in net turnover, you are in scope, and you will be required to publish your sustainability report. But it's important to look if you are a smaller or medium-sized company, because it doesn't mean that you are automatically out of CSRD or compliance disclosure sustainability data. because the large companies may require you to report about their value chain. That means that if you are selling products, components, or service for companies in scope, they may request you data. But then these rules, that the revised rules explicitly show that limited the amount of data that medium and small companies have to disclose. So in simple terms, the companies cannot push the entire reporting burden to downstream companies. In terms of processes, like where we are with CSRD, the CSRD is not official published, but it's in its process. So what we have now is that the Parliament is finalizing a correct version that is with this scope. They are just changing some reference within the articles or so. And after that, it will move to the Council. And then when both institutions formally adopt them, they will publish, the state members will transpose it into national law, and then it will become effective. So now we are in a direction that is the CSRD is structural stable. Let's talk about a little bit about the reporting standards under this directive, that is the ESRS. So the reporting standards was revised last year as well. An update draft was released by EFRAG in November last year, and it reduces the mandatory data points by 60%. This is significant, but doesn't mean that report less is easier, or doesn't mean that you don't have to be clear or assertive. So sometimes it seems less work, but it's not actually what does it mean. So another point that is settled is the double materiality assessment. So companies have to see how sustainability issues impact your company financially, and how the company impacts the world around you, society, environment, and so, and build this double materiality assessment. But the good news is that you are now allowed to combine a top-down strategic approach, not only scoring and bottom-up approach. So this is simplified, and qualitative assessments are now acceptable as well to justify the data points. And this is what we have right now, is the draft of the ESRS that is published last year. They are current under revision by the Commission, and we have a prediction that the final version is expected in June of 2026. We can skip to the EU taxonomy. So now let's talk about finance. So EU classification system is the EU taxonomy. We can see it as a sustainability dictionary for capital markets. The sustainability in finance, we can see. So to the EU taxonomy, companies, they must analyze their business activities one by one and determine according to this law if they have to disclose the CAPEX, the turnover, or the OPEX related to this materiality aspects. So what does it mean? It means that investor may ask you, your company tomorrow, what is the percentage of your revenue that is truly aligned with environmental sustainability, environmental and sustainable activities under this framework. The scope is the same of the CSRD plus the financial institutions. And as it's something very common in capital markets, companies outside the scope investor can ask about it. And one thing that changed is the materiality. So for example, if you have a material topic that is under the EU taxonomy, but it's less than 10% of your total turnover, CAPEX and OPEX, you don't have to disclose. So this is diminish your burden of reporting. But if you have something more than this threshold, you still have to submit your assessment. So the taxonomic is just no longer a regulatory disclosure. It's becoming a reference point for capital markets, bank, and investor. And it's something that companies should keep an eye on it, especially in the EU. And now we're gonna shift from reporting to due diligence. And this is the CSDDD. CSDDD is the Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And it was object of Omnibus as well last year. And we saw a lot of political shifts and discussion about it. While the CSRD focus on disclosure, this CSDDD focus on conduct. So what is this law about? This is about how companies identify, prevent, and manage human rights and environmental risks across their value chain. So it's not about what happened, but showing how you're going to manage the risk before the harm occurs. The scope of the applicability of CSRDDD has been narrowed down and only applies to very, very large companies. Those companies with more than 5,000 employees and 1.5 billion in turnover. Another thing that changed, a core concept of the law, is the risk approach based. So companies are not required to investigate everything in their supply chain, everything in their value chain related to human rights. They have to prioritize and investigate matters related that implies a reasonable risk of adverse impact. So it's not about a perfection report, but how you prioritize your teams inside your company. And another important update is there is no EU-wide civil liability regime, and the penalties are be handled under the national laws. The core of this law is about how you extract risk management, how you deal with system, process, and documentation and governance inside your company. We can go to the CBAM. Now, switching to carbon. So carbon border adjustment mechanism is another framework. It's a tool to put fair price on carbon emitted during the production of carbon-intensive goods that are entering in the EU. So this mechanism introduces a carbon price in certain goods that get into the European Union. So things such as cement, steel, aluminum, fertilizers, electricity are now under this reporting obligation. So what changed in the CBAM? So CBAM first target only primary raw materials, and now the scope is broader. It's cover products that include things that are processed or semi-finished goods that embedded like emissions along the value chain. For example, if you have steel or aluminum in the content for having machinery, equipment, mounting, cylinders, you have to be compliant with this law. So what the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, is asking. So is in efficacy right now, and companies that imports more than 15 tons per year of the products listed on this law have to not continue their business as usual. They have to obtain the CBAM authorization, and they have to calculate how much of these products use the carbon and then buy the certificates. So now this year will be like the year to start to make this reporting, this accountment, together your declaration. And from next year, from 2027 onwards, importers need to purchase the CBAM certificates. So it's not, at a point, it's not just emission data that is needed. You have to be audited, you have to price your business, and it's not longer like you have KPI sitting in a theoretical way. It's now you have trades, costs, supply chain decisions that has to consider the CBAM. And it's not only a climate policy, industrial policy, straight, the CBAM is expressed the carbon accounting and how the companies who import cement and so have to behave. Changing importing carbon to importing other commodities, we're gonna extend our analysis to the EU deforestation regulation. This regulation was designed to ensure that specific commodities placed in the European market are not linked to deforestation and degradation. So if your company imports cattle, palm oil, soil, wood, cocoa, coffee, or rubber, you have to be compliant. And the thing is that EUDR was already postponed twice. And this, in the end of this year, large companies will have to report. The thing with the EUDR is that the EU 8C system that you have to fill your declaration, countries classifications that you see if a country that you are important, it's considered risky or not, or even recognition like the third country, like certification schemes is not something that is settled. So we have some challenges when we analyze and comply with EUDR that EU is still working on that. So for example, the legislation tells that when you import something from a Latin American country, you have to comply with the legality principles of this country. But we don't know still how this will be interpreted by the member states here in the European Union. And last but not least, we're going to talk a little bit about the Californian laws that is important for companies that do business in Europe, because last year and this year, we receive a lot of multinational clients talking about the CSB 253 and 261. They are not EU regulations, but as many as our clients do business in California, they have to reply. So it's something for companies to be aware. One, the SB 253 is a law regarding to large companies to disclose about Scope 1, Scope 2, and eventually next year, Scope 3 emissions. And if your company are doing business in California with more than 1 billion of revenue, you have to disclose basing on that. And you have another one that is the Senate Bill 261 that now is current pause because it's having some judiciary discussions about it if it's going to continue or not. But a lot of clients that we have are already disclosing on that. And it talks about climate risk. So companies with more than 500 million revenue and doing business in California have to report climate risk assessments based on the TCFD style disclosure. And even for global companies, we see that California is leading the discussion of climate in the US. So we may hope that this kind of spread to the US. So being aware of California, it's very important.
Super. Thank you very much, Mariana. So now hopefully we have a rather comprehensive overview of what happened on the regulatory landscape up until now, starting 2025 and up of this piece of 2026. And I think that the leading questions that we are left with is, what do we do with all this? So I think one first comment is that we've understood that the regulatory direction is pretty much defined. So there could be refinements, or very likely there are going to be refinements, but not major rollbacks or not major changes in direction. So more or less, what is there now, what is known now, is what you can reasonably base yourself for your future disclosures. There is still some degree of uncertainty, for example, regarding CSRD, the ESRS, so the actual sort of applicability standards still have to be concluded and defined. But we know more or less what's going to happen there. We know what are the thresholds. At this point, you should know if you are in scope or not for which regulation. And one other big takeaway that we may want to carry home from all this is that we should really try and look at these reporting exercises as ongoing capabilities in the long term. One key concept, I think, is all these political changes and all these regulation uncertainties happened because many organizations were at risk with this reporting, meaning that many companies were not really ready for reporting, and then the EU decided to essentially postpone regulation by a certain amount of time. So at this point, when the regulation is going to kick in, it's going to kick in. And the good idea, the good sort of way of making a plan is use the time that you have now sort of as a gift from this postponement to really make sure that you are ready when the regulation kicks in, because then there's going to be sort of, you knew that this was going to be delayed. You knew that you had an extra couple of years. Now we expect good quality in your disclosures. This is going to be the general mindset with which the ESG disclosures is going to be received. So it's important to plan thinking of the long term and thinking of sort of building up your capabilities. You can start with what you have already, with what is known to you, and progressively build up to make sure that you are ready for your disclosures in the next couple of years that you have of time to sort of get there. But then we've also seen that ESG was really a value driver even beyond regulation. So amidst all this uncertainty of Omnibus, there were organizations that were really pushing for CSRD to stay, for EUDR to stay, and other regulations to stay. And the reason is that this really brings clarity on the way that the organizations are doing business, especially on the ESG values, but not only. In many ways, it's also embedded in the financial performances, or at least in the risk that the companies will face in time on their financial performances. Think, for example, of CSDDD or climate risk related disclosures. So stakeholders really demand for ESG data, even if companies don't have to necessarily disclose because of regulation. So how do we really match these two different perspectives? And I think that's really a concept to try and think about. On one side, we have regulators, so essentially countries, national regulations, asking to you disclosures, and they want completeness, they want the consistency with this regulation, they want certain degrees of assurance, internal controls and these kind of things, looking at the existing regulation that is applying to you. Everything else is not really valuable here. But then on the other side, we have investors and we have other stakeholders. And this side here is really focusing on data that is useful for them to take decisions like, do I choose your product or another product? Do I invest in your organization or another organization? And let's say this team is really looking for comparability and for performances that aren't necessarily coming from regulation. There are many other frameworks that we see many organizations being asked for. Probably all of these are known to you: the Carbon Disclosure Project, the SBTI, asking you to sort of set target reduction goals and commit to this decarbonization, but also schemes like EcoVadis or TCFD, particularly relevant for companies that have higher risks posed by climate-related changes, essentially. So the key point is you should really try and satisfy both. So on one side, you have what you have to do because of regulation. On the other side, you have to understand what extra requirements may come to you because of stakeholders. The good news is that the two things really come together because usually regulations are building on other frameworks which are most popular out of stakeholder demands. So there is a lot of interoperability between these two. So I think when you are going to plan for your 2026, if you haven't done it yet, what is the very first things that you should do, sort of the non-negotiable actions for you to take? The first one is selecting the framework. So first, what is regulation demanding to you? What is it that you have to do? Otherwise, you have a risk of non-disclosure. You have probably fines or, this kind of also visibility and market issues. But then on top of that, what other framework that you want to follow? Maybe some partners of yours, some clients of yours are demanding that you do target setting, then you have to do SBTI or CDP, something like that. It's very typical. So first of all, identify what is it that you have to work with in the year to come / years to come, because as we said, it's really a multi-year sort of mindset that you should use here. And then go through your materiality, likely a double materiality, because here we are a bit speaking in the climate of CSRD, but even if it's not CSRD, materiality, so the concept of understanding what is really material, what is really relevant for your business, is a concept that is here to stay, and especially organizations that are working with single materiality should progressively pass to double materiality, because this is what is going to happen in the industry anyway. So most frameworks are going to evolve to include double materiality, substituting single materiality. So understand your priorities, and if possible, put in the perspective of the stakeholders that you want to make happy, essentially. And then I would say definitely work with your GAG inventory. We know that this is one piece of ESG reporting that is sort of common to most, if not all, reporting frameworks. So calculate your scope 1, scope 2 emission and your material scope 3 emissions. And then when you're doing this, if CBAM is applicable to you, just keep in mind what are the sort of imported emissions. So what part of this emission comes from the big six that Mariana was just discussing before. So you have it ready for later. And then with these 3 pieces done, you can assess your gaps. So try and understand, do I have all the data that I need for successfully report for this regulation, for disclosing all of my material impacts, risk and opportunities, and to cover my scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. If you have them, super, put them aside and try to build a good reporting framework around them. Otherwise, plan on how you can gather this data. And then I think very important exercise, try to map the different frameworks. As we were just saying, most, if not all, frameworks really speak to each other. So there are concepts from CSRD that are relevant for example, TCFD and vice versa. When you have to disclose your ESRS U1 on climate, then you have to disclose your climate transition plan, which is a piece of TCFD, and so on. Really many parts of these frameworks speak to each other. So understand which are these parts so that you can have everything under your eyes and try to get all the data together, be consistent among your disclosures, and also reduce the effort in multiplying your data requests to your value chain. And then with all this done, you are essentially ready to do your reporting, meaning you can synthesize all the work that you've done on your ESG and produce your chosen disclosures. For this step in particular, in some cases, it might be better to wait a little bit. For example, if you want to do a gap analysis on CSRD, then better to wait to have full clarity on the ESRS. So expectedly June. But for other frameworks, you have essentially all the knowledge that you need as of now, and you can start producing your reports. Now, essentially, from all the information that you have, so sort of the last step to the production of your report, how do you work making sure that you are keeping under control your risk and also your workload? And we identified 4 key sort of topics. The first is data architecture that has to be modular in the sense that it has to be flexible enough to adapt to changing regulatory requirements. So really, speaking to the different parts of different regulations and, sort of combining information so that you can collect your data and then have this data really helping generating your reports. But then also your architecture being scalable in the sense that more and more data is likely for you to be necessary on one side as more regulations become applicable to you, and on the other side as your ESG maturity increases. You are likely to have some data gaps in your first reporting years, and you're just going to disclose that to be the fact. For example, we acknowledge that we have some gaps in our value chain, for example, social impact. We are not going to disclose on them now because we don't have this information, but we're going to get this information. So you want to be scalable in that sense, be able to get further information and include it in your existing reporting. And to do this very effectively, ownership and workflows have to be clear. You know who has to be responsible of what, who's going to do which part of the reporting, of the data collection, who's going to sort of engage with what stakeholders, and make sure that you have a collaborative environment to manage all of your ESG data. This also comes together with some ability to adapt. We've seen last year/this year that regulations can change. Likely core concepts are not really going to be disrupted, but some things can evolve. So also try and design some systems or some processes that don't completely break if one single piece changes. So be able to sort of adapt to changing requirements, but then also changing stakeholder expectations over time. I hope it's all clear until now, and we are soon going to pass to the Q&A. So bear with us for another couple of slides, and then we get there. I think what is important to sort of go towards the conclusion for this year. Try and build a reliable baseline for your ESG data. For example, if you haven't done it yet, establish your first carbon footprint inventory. So your scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon accounting, so that you can sort of build on this, start reporting on this, and then compare with updated inventories over time. And this is really like the foundational step for any reporting framework and for decision making in itself, because you start really building data that you can use for sort of making sort of scientific decisions. Then check your EU taxonomy eligibility and alignment data. We put it here because of all the regulations that we've seen before. EU taxonomy is the major source of confusion. It's probably more reduced compared to, for example, CSDDD or CSRD, but it has some complexity inherent to it. So be ready to sort of take control of this framework in particular. And then work with your value chain so that you can get data from suppliers. This is going to be very useful for CSRD because you have to include your value chain. It's going to be extremely useful for CBAM because you have to understand what are the emissions coming from your suppliers as specifically as you can. And it's going to be very relevant as well for CSDDD, but in general for all of your frameworks, including the carbonization pathways and so on. Make sure that you can control your data and that you collect your documentation, because audit may come, in some cases it's already mandatory, in some other cases it might be mandatory, but just simply it might be required as an extra sort of step for making things certain. So stakeholders might demand for audit whenever, even if it's not mandatory for your disclosures. So make sure that you can go through audit trails, make sure you have everything clearly organized, and that every information, every decision can be backed by evidence. And then as a last step, be prepared and organized for cross-functional collaboration. ESG reporting is really complex. It really takes resources. It really takes time. And single individuals or, one-man teams are very likely to struggle a lot if they are to produce these reports and all the work which is behind the reports on their own. So try to involve teams from other departments early as well. So sustainability information grows on finance information, on risk assessments, beyond climate-related risk assessments, on other types of compliance and operation and procurement and everything else in your organization. So really try to build structures that allow you to communicate effectively internally, build some sort of mini governance so that you know who you're going to ask data to receive information from and who's going to be responsible for what in your compliance in CSRD and beyond. And then I think if we want to really give you a couple of examples of pitfalls and how to avoid them. First of all, begin with your non-negotiables, as we were saying before. So understand your frameworks, do your double materiality, GHG inventory, gap analysis. These are going to be the basis for everything. And no matter what is going to be the regulation applicable to you, these are necessary steps that you have to go through. So begin with that, and you know that you are doing some steps in the right direction. Then try to always think of repeatable processes. So maybe make a little extra effort for the first time so that you know that you're going to decrease the effort in any other reporting cycles, because reporting is something that comes with a certain cadence, yearly by yearly, but it comes and comes again once it becomes applicable to you. Try and really use systems which are more intelligent to spreadsheet, because this is going to save you tons of time and also tons of mistake possibilities. And as a last step, try to align as early as you can with auditors so that you know who's going to check your work is aligned on the way that you are performing this work. Very common pitfalls that we've seen in the first years are, I think, over-reporting, in the sense that companies try to put it all in there in double materiality, really say that everything is really important to them and they want to sort of save the world, which is very, very important, but then you can't probably work on 20 parallel topics which are material to your organization and do a very ESG team. So focus on what is really relevant for you, maybe 5, 6 goals. Don't try to do everything since day one or year one. Build it time by time. Also, try to don't underestimate the efforts, especially with data gathering, because most of your data is not going to come through you directly, maybe not directly from your organization either, but from value chain, from other locations or assets of your own organization. And there's going to be time that you're just going to be spending in waiting for replies to come. So consider all this time, consider all these efforts, and plan for them in your plan. So also include documentation that has to be as strong as you can. With documentation is the number one reasons for audits failing. So put on the side all the documentation that are sort of showing why you are saying certain things, proving certain numbers, or backing up certain decisions. And then try and be really clear with all of your internal processes and the ownership of the different tasks. With this, you are most likely set for success, and the biggest pitfalls are not really going to be dragging you down and sort of drowning in the effort for ESG reporting.
So yeah, thank you a lot, Carlo and Mariana. And yeah, to wrap things up for today, so what I would like you to remember from today is that the Omnibus definitely brings clarity, but it does not bring relief from responsibility. Also, very soon, the CSRD will be stable and ready for execution. So with that in mind, 2026 is all about building repeatable and auditable ESG processes. But also flexibility will stay very important as regulations and also expectations are still expecting to evolve. So then how can Brightest, it's our platform and consulting, help you with that? We can help you translate ESG regulation or EU regulation into structured and report-ready data. We support CSRD, CSDDD, EUDR, aligned data collection, among many other frameworks as well. And we also enable EU taxonomy mapping and reporting. You can, in the platform, manage multi-entity and multi-site ESG reporting. And yeah, you then have audit-ready ESG data as the requirements evolve. So basically, if you're still struggling with some ESG data chaos or want to manage your data reporting a bit more efficiently, feel free to reach out to this email you see in the green box to do a quick demo. And summarized, Brightest is a truly all-in-one platform where you can really do all sorts of ESG data collection, management, and reporting. We cover, well, as you see, about 40 different global reporting standards, and also use a lot of AI workflows to make things a bit faster. And of course, you will have an amazing team supporting you. So with that, we came to an end of the first part of the webinar. We'll now move on to the Q&A session. So again, I invite you to submit any questions in the chat so Carlo or Mariana can answer. And I will already go ahead with the first questions I see in the chat. So the first question for the Q&A session from Thomas is, so the California SB 253, is this regulation asking for a company carbon footprint or for a product carbon footprint?
So yeah, that's a good question. And like generally, what this framework is asking you to disclose is your scope 3 emissions. Then, if you have PCF, then that is a very, very valid, robust, and sort of clear way of understanding your product-related carbon. So if you have that, I would say that's probably the most correct and also simple way to disclose in this category, which is the purchase goods and services, probably part of your scope 3 emissions, but it's not something that is mandatory or necessary. So SB 253 doesn't necessarily trigger the obligation of creating product carbon footprint or to do your carbon footprint in any particular way. Just it has to be aligned with the GHG protocol, which is the leading framework for carbon footprint in general. I hope that answers it.
Perfect. Thank you, Carlo. And yeah, then a second question of Shashi. Are there any updates to the guarantee of origin certificates used to claim green energy use? Any new limits to the percentage or number of such certificates?
So these certificates, the limits are like sort of the constraints that you have to use these GOs depend on what frameworks you are using. For example, there is nothing specified on this or updated in the CSRD, but then, for example, SBTI is mentioning them and is mentioning the way that these are used. There are no real updates as of now, because as of now, there is still the version 1 of SBTI being sort of in place. But since 2027, I think just January 2027, companies that are going to set new targets are going to be allowed to use the V2. And then from June on, they're going to be sort of forced to use the V2. And with these frameworks, there are some tweaks with which these market instruments can be used. So not only the guarantees of origin, um, or the purchase agreements or anything of that sort, but also, for example, certificates regarding sustainable aviation fuel. So there are going to be updates probably from 2027.
Amazing. Thank you, Carla. And then another question from Thomas. So would you expect another omnibus, like maybe any initiative postponing the emission trading system?
So I will take that, Carlo.
Yeah.
So we have many omnibus going on right now. We have around 10 packets going on. So the first one was about sustainability that delays the CSRD and the CSDDD. The other one that is coming is the Omnibus 2 that is about investment. We have the Omnibus 3 that is about agriculture. Digitalization, then we're going to have one that is in process about chemical, and we're going to have about environment. So yeah, this package will cause implications on other sustainability frameworks, but it's being step by step because the first one, it took a year going back and forth. So we have to keep an eye on it. Anything, Carlo, to add?
No, I think clear. Like we are not expecting an omnibus that is sort of editing the current omnibus. So, for example, what is going to be settled about CSRD, CSDDD in like as soon as this is settled is going to be settled. There is very unlikely going to be further discussion on that. But yes, as said from Mariana, there are other omnibus packages regarding or not ESG that may affect the way that we currently do ESG disclosures.
Makes sense. Yeah, definitely not boring in the EU. And then we got another question per email. So if we have multiple frameworks being asked by multiple stakeholders, how should we go about it and what should we prioritize?
That's a good question, and I think like if I can take it, Mariana, on like generally, of course, prioritize what is potentially more important for you, which means like what is what is most risky for you. It can be that some frameworks, if you're not complying, give you a big fine. Can be that some other frameworks, if you're not complying, make you lose business because maybe some particular partners are demanding for that. And we've seen that happening with several of our clients. I would say try and prioritize what you know it's more sort of horizontal and generic to other frameworks as well. So, for example, try to definitely use frameworks which are used with other frameworks as well. One example can be carbon accounting. If you do that, then you know that you are doing SBTI, or you can do SBTI as well. You can do the CDP as well. You can do ESRS E1 in the CSRD as well. So try and like look at what is mapping to more frameworks at a time, and then yeah, try and prioritize also based on your resources and what you think really comes first in terms of deadlines.
Thank you. Amazing. And then another question. So how much time should organizations now plan for CSRD compliance after the omnibus?
For CSRD compliance, so I think it's necessary to break it into steps in the sense that first comes double materiality, and likely to do a well done double materiality is going to take, let's say, 6 months or something around that, you can be faster if you are faster and if you have good ESG departments and, you know, robust starting points, you have governance and all of that. It can take more if things have to go through several approval processes. So depending on, you know, how are internal controls done in your organization, but let's say 6 months for that. Then doing the gap analysis is not really something that is so time consuming, but what is really time consuming is the data gathering. So getting all the information internally can already be complex if maybe you have to ask procurement for some data, or, you know, production facilities from some other data. And then if you are looking at your supply chain, so if you really have to go down to tier 1, 2, 3, then it really can take lots of time. And then the last step is auditing, and auditing can really put things in discussion again. So I think overall, if you are due reporting in 2028, it would be a good idea to commence like mid 2026, the latest. I would say if you are working with a 1.5 year time frame, you're losing you're not risking being late and having to rush and then not complying maybe eventually. So yeah, let's say 1.5 years.
1.5 years. Okay. Oh, makes sense. And of course, well, also a big part of this preparation will be the double materiality. So how exactly is this changing after the Omnibus?
So it's changing. It's changing in a couple different ways, but I think maybe the two key concepts that we can take home from this is one, the topics are more or less the same, but have been incorporated. So some topics are sort of merged with others. So when you're working with, for example, your working conditions, then these working conditions are one topic looking at the same time of at your own workforce and at your value chain. So it's not anymore the AR 16 very long list of topics to sort of drive your materiality assessment, but it's you taking that as a sort of general idea and then targeting specifically to where things matter for your organization. And then the other big concept is that the materiality assessment, in some cases, it was a little bit weird because we were going to evaluate some topics and be really detailed on like scale, scope, likelihood, and these things, already knowing what was going to be the outcome. Like if you are, for example, we work a lot with AI. It's obvious that AI responsibility or something in that spectrum is going to be very relevant for us, right? So the new materiality guidelines allow top-down approach, meaning it allows an organization to say, without spending lots of time in evaluating this topic, we already put it in the high priority, in the high materiality. Then you can mix things. Some topics you can really do bottom up and do more like sophisticated or like sort of scientific scoring, but it really allows you to do this top down and say like management says this is material, full stop. So this is simplifying the things quite a bit.
Makes sense. Okay. Yeah, thank you a lot. And yeah, also looking at the time, actually, we are coming to an end of the webinar. So also, if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out per email or per LinkedIn to one of us. And also for a demo, feel free to reach out again to this email or just drop a message in the chat. Thank you a lot for joining.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to be with you.